what if a single conversation could just shatter every social rule of its time? Well, that's what we're digging into today. We're going to break down the story at the very heart of a classic Billy Graham sermon, a story about a forbidden path, a total outcast, and this incredible offer of something called living water. Let's get right into it. So, everything kicks off with a journey. Jesus is walking from Judea all the way back home to Galilee. Now, if you look at a map, it seems pretty straightforward, but the path he decides to take, well, that was a choice that was a really, really big deal. You know, this one line from the sermon's source text is just packed with drama. To us, today, it just sounds like a travel detail, right? He had to go through Samaria. But back then, whoa, this was a deliberate, almost provocative statement. So why all the fuss? You have to understand, there was this deep, centuries-old grudge between the Jews and the Samaritans. They did not get along. Most Jewish travelers would literally walk miles out of their way, taking the long route just to avoid stepping foot in Samaria. So when Jesus decides he must go through it, that's not a shortcut, it's a statement. He's intentionally crossing a cultural and social barrier to keep what the sermon calls a divine appointment. And that forbidden journey, well, it sets the stage for the sermon's whole central idea, and it's built around a metaphor that pretty much anyone, anywhere can understand: thirst. Now, the sermon isn't just talking about being thirsty for a glass of water on a hot day. It's introducing this concept of a spiritual thirst. It's described as this fundamental ache that we all feel deep down, this longing for something more, for a sense of peace and meaning that just seems to be out of our grasp. And the sermon argues that when we feel this spiritual thirst, our first instinct is to try and fix it ourselves. We start running to what it calls the wrong watering holes, chasing after more money, more success, or different kinds of pleasure. But these are described as being like broken cisterns. They can't actually hold any water. They might give you a temporary buzz, but that deep down thirst, it always comes back. And to really drive this point home, the sermon tells this really poignant story about a student. She had everything you could want: privilege, education, the works, but she still felt this deep, nagging emptiness. And all she could say was, "Father, I want something, but I don't know what it is." The sermon uses this to show just how universal and yet how hard to define this inner thirst really is. Okay, so this idea of spiritual thirst brings us right to the heart of the story, an encounter at a famous spot called Jacob's Well. Now get this, it's noon, the hottest part of the day, when a woman comes to get water all by herself. That fact alone, that she's there alone at that hour, is our first big clue, that she's probably an outcast trying to avoid everyone else. So Jesus is there, tired from his journey, just resting, and then he does the absolutely unthinkable. He speaks to her, a Jewish man speaking to a Samaritan woman. And he doesn't just talk to her, he asks her for a drink, putting himself in a position where he needs something from her. The sermon explains that for her, this was just completely and utterly shocking. So this simple request for a drink? The sermon frames this as way more than just small talk. It's a revolutionary act. In that one little moment, Jesus is shown just sweeping away generations of prejudice. All those barriers, racial, national, gender, they're just gone. He's seeing a person, not a label. And then he completely flips the script. He offers her something in return: living water. And the sermon is really clear on this. This isn't something you can earn or deserve or buy. It's a free gift. A gift that, at its core, represents the complete forgiveness of sin. Okay, so things are about to get real. The conversation takes this sharp, personal turn. It moves away from these big spiritual ideas and dives right into the messy, complicated reality of this woman's life. His next words seem so simple, so innocent. Go, call your husband. But the sermon explains this was anything but a casual question. It was specifically designed to touch a sore nerve, to lovingly, but very directly, point to the exact source of her pain and her shame, the very reason she was an outcast to begin with. The sermon uses this incredible image to describe what she must have felt. 1,000 searchlights. I mean, can you imagine? It's a moment of total exposure. She instantly realizes this man knows everything about her: her past, her 5 husbands, the man she was currently with. Every secret she had was suddenly out in the open. So what do you do in a moment like that? Well, the sermon argues that to receive this living water, a person has to go through what it calls repentance. And it breaks it down into 3 really simple parts. First, you change your mind about your past. Second, you literally turn around and change your direction, walk away from that life. And third, you commit to a brand new way of living. And this all leads us to the climax of the story, to this amazing transformation. After confronting her past head-on, the woman is finally ready to receive the gift that she's just been offered. The woman, she senses he's more than just a man, maybe a prophet, and she starts talking about waiting for the Messiah to come and explain everything. And right then, Jesus makes what the sermon calls the greatest revelation. He just says it, plain and simple. I am he. He tells this Samaritan outcast, this woman living in shame, that he's the one they've all been waiting for. Now, pay close attention to this next little detail because it's huge. She leaves her water pot behind. The sermon presents this as this incredibly symbolic act, the very thing that brought her to the well, the physical thirst, the burden she was carrying. It's just forgotten. In a split second, her entire list of priorities has been completely turned upside down. Think about this. The woman who came to the well, trying to hide from people, now runs straight back to the very community that rejected her. She becomes a witness, an advocate, and her message is so simple, so honest. Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. The thing that was her greatest source of shame becomes the very foundation of her story. So, in the end, the sermon really boils this whole encounter down to one powerful idea, that our deepest search for meaning and peace, that spiritual thirst we all feel, isn't really for success or happiness in the end, but for forgiveness. And that once that thirst is quenched, everything else starts to change. Which really just leaves us with a final question to think about. Is our deepest thirst for forgiveness